Hi, I'm David Anderson, and this is the Timex Sinclair online user group meeting, joined with my co-host Adam Trionfo, who is a new to Timex, relatively new to Timex person, but very enthusiastic. We like Adam a lot.
You have to say that.
Yes. Even though he likes other systems, we like Adam a lot. So today we're going to be joined by a couple of folks who are thousands of miles away from where I live in Buffalo, but who actually are only a few hundred kilometers apart in the former, one's in the Czech Republic and the other is in Slovakia. So from Prague in the Czech Republic, we're joined by Jaroslav Švelch, who's head of the Prague Game Production Studies Group at Charles University. And his book, Gaming the Iron Curtain, How Teenagers and Amateurs in Communist Czechoslovakia Claimed the Media of Computer Games, is available from most bookstores. Stanislav Hrda is in Bratislava, Slovakia, and is also joining us. Stano has been sharing programs from behind the former Iron Curtain that demonstrate the capabilities of the Sinclair ZX Spectrum and Timex Computer 2068. And then we're hoping that Evie Salomon, who makes the backbit and other retro computing hardware, will join us a little bit later from California. So with that, I'm going to let Adam do a little intro if he'd like.
An intro, so maybe basically everything he said is true. So he's not lying so far. Let's see, I wrote down a couple other things. I would like, I think Tim is on here. Yeah, Tim Horner, you're on here somewhere. And I'd like you to give us an update on your digitizer project. And I know you're working on it with, I don't know directly with David, but you've been posting a lot about it. And I don't know how far you've gotten, if you've gotten it to work yet. You can talk about that. Are you there?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great.
I am.
All right, let's see. David, I'd like you to do some, I don't know if you've done many updates to your site in the last 2 weeks since our last meeting, but if you have, maybe you can talk about those briefly.
A little bit.
Let's see, we've got, I don't know if, yeah, I don't think Mark is on here, but if Mark Scheck joins us, he's loaded up a program on his Timex computer for the first time in many years, and he decided to load up a program called Home Improvement Analyze, and I was just wondering what the heck made him choose that. Is Willie on here yet? I'm not sure.
Not yet,
but
no.
Not yet. But if he is, I'd like him to jump in with what he's been saying. And Jeff Burrell, are you on here yet? I don't think he is.
Just
he is? Okay. Well, he has actually taken the code that David has been working on for several years. And he's gotten it so it can assemble under the ZMAC Z80 assembler. It apparently matches byte for byte with the final ROM, which is good. And I'd like him to talk about maybe how he did that and how he's using that with his cartridge that can use an SD card that he's working on. And when Evie joins us, like you said, she has already created a cartridge for the Timex 1000 and many other computers that can load software from an SD card as well. And she would like to work on one for the Timex 2068, but I think it would only load cartridge software and not, it wouldn't, I don't think, overlap with what Jeff is doing. I don't think. Maybe they can talk it out here.
Right. It's not quite
clear. That's what I've got.
So Yaro, tell us about yourself, your book, all the good stuff.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to meet you all. I suspected that there was like a US or an North American kind of group of Sinclair users, but I didn't know it was so active. So that's really nice to see. Yeah, so I'm I guess a historian of computer games. I teach at a university in Prague, at Charles University, my biggest project so far was this book that you talked about. You mentioned, Gaming the Iron Curtain. I can sort of just briefly say something about the book, kind of like the background of it. I can show slides. Is that okay?
I'm just setting it so that you can share your screen. Yep.
Yeah, it's very very minimal, but just a few images. Yeah, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so this is what the book looks like. It came out yeah, like about 3 years ago on MIT Press. And interestingly, it's I wrote it in English first because there was already interest in the kind of among the international kind of game historians and computer historians to hear the story of how 8-bit computing kind of took roots in in Czechoslovakia and behind the Iron Curtain in general, because these are stories that like hadn't really been told before that, and at least not in English. So I think that's like it's an it might be an interesting window for like people in North America or the UK or other countries kind of see into that space, which myself and Stano also kind of inhabited for some time. And I maybe like a little bit about myself and kind of my history with computing. My dad is a programmer or was a programmer. He's like an IT specialist now, but he used to like program in a factory and in an IT center of a match production factory. So they produce matches, but you kind of like, yeah, people don't use that anymore. But there was this factory in my hometown, and he was a programmer there. And I played some games, and I did some programming on the machines they had there. They didn't have Sinclair machines there. They had some East German clones of K-Pro computers, so like CPM machines. So those were the Robotron East German machines, and they had some later. They had some like IBM PC compatible computers from Italy. And they also had some mainframe machines, mostly made like locally. So that was my kind of first encounter with programming. And then I got my first computer, which was actually just after the Velvet Revolution. So the time that I write about in my book is a bit earlier than that. I was already alive, but I didn't really kind of, I was young. I was born in 1981. So my first computer was a Sam Coupe in 1990, and that was like this obscure British computer. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you?
Yeah, I've heard of it. They only made like 5,000 of them or something like that, right? Very few.
Yeah, they're pretty rare, and unfortunately,
there's a podcast I listen to, and it's a running joke that it's a made-up computer because people write in about it and they're like, "We've never heard of that computer." So
yeah, so it existed, and it was my first machine. It was amazing. It was a really kind of nice 8-bit computer. Kind of came too late to actually make any kind of big impact, but it was really nice, and it was compatible with the Spectrum. So I got in touch with people in town. I'm from a small town who had Spectrum computers, and I just borrowed tapes with mostly games from them, and I could load them into the SAM computer. So that's how I kind of got into the Spectrum scene in a way. So I played games. I wrote some programs, some games, but just very amateur stuff, like nothing worth mentioning. Unlike Stano, who like made really cool games in the 80s. But then then I did some other stuff. I studied journalism and some in college, and I did some other stuff, and then I kind of returned to it when I was doing my PhD. I was in the media studies department, and I said that. And they kind of thought I was a promising student, and they said, so do you want to write a dissertation here at the department? And I was like, yeah, maybe, but it has to be about something that I'm kind of really passionate about and that I really want to write about. And they were okay with me writing about the history of computer games in Czechoslovakia. And at first, I was very ambitious. I wanted to write a book that would kind of go into the 90s. But then it just turned out that there was so much happening in the 80s that like it could fill the whole book. Yeah, and of course, I mean, the Spectrum plays a very important role there.
So what was your book before it was a book? Was it actually a paper that you published for school then?
Not really. It was a dissertation basically. So it was a dissertation that was written in Czech originally, but then I completely rewrote it and published it in English, and now there's actually a Czech translation is coming very soon. But it started out as a school project basically, as a PhD dissertation, which also gave me like a lot of time to work on it, and didn't have to worry too much about, just like having some other kind of job and doing it on the side. I could kind of do it full time for some.
So that makes me, because I've read your book. I actually, sorry, I didn't buy it. I got it from Interlibrary Loan, so I got it.
No worries.
But I read it, and it was great. I thought it was wonderful. And I've read many of the MIT Press books, and what impressed me, of course, your book is good, but like your bibliography, I'm going to buy the book because of the bibliography, because it's got so much material in there, and there's so many sources that you cite, and you put so much work into getting it right. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know if you got it right, but I'm trusting you. I'm trusting you. So I really am glad that you cited your sources, which is,
Sure.
There's so many books I've read that are written by amateurs who, they're interesting reads, but I don't know if I can believe half of what they say. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I really try to kind of have everything correct, and it's a lot of material that's like material, like books about what was happening in other countries, but also like the primary sources, like the old. Yeah, that's what I'm kind of showing here. Like, so how do I know what I write about, right? So how did I get all this information? So I did a lot of interviews. I interviewed Stano, by the way. He was one of my interviewees, of course. I looked at some kind of old documents, old club newsletters. There were really not kind of computer magazines to speak of in the 80s in Czechoslovakia. But there were computer clubs, and they were very important, and like they had their newsletters, and people kind of published in those newsletters. It was very hard to get a permit to publish a magazine, but if it was an internal newsletter, then you could do it. And yeah, I've looked at software that has been preserved. I'm not active myself in software preservation, but I've just taken advantage of the work of people, of fans who have been doing it. So there are like really nice online databases of local games for the Spectrum and for other platforms as well. But the Spectrum, the Sinclair Spectrum, was the dominant platform for the whole of the 80s, basically, until the early 90s. Yeah, I've collected some stuff that people gave me and that I found, like including some like really interesting kind of modified Spectrum machines. And like what I'm showing here is like a computer mouse, like a DIY kind of mouse that you could buy as a kit, and then you can assemble it.
Oh, actually, I don't see a mouse on the screen here. I just see your sources.
The red thing.
Oh yeah, it's the red thing.
Oh, that's supposed to be a mouse?
And those little black things, those are probably buttons, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's definitely interesting looking. Okay.
Yeah. You can, like, there's a website. I can share a link a bit later. There's a website like that accompanies the book, and there's like loads of images there. But like I couldn't fit them into the book, but there's like a lot of images, and like in one of the images you can also see it from the other side, and you can see that it was built around a ping pong ball. So instead of like the the little ball, there's just like a regular ping pong ball inside of it. So yes, it was this DIY project. Yeah, and please, if anyone has questions or comments, just please interrupt me.
Well, you have the piece of hardware. Do you have any of the software that's supposed to use it?
Yeah, there were. So there were some kind of graphic editors, like painting programs that could be modified to use it, but generally there was very little software to use the mouse. I think that like the main I think the main reasons behind this project were like to show that it's possible to have a mouse for the Spectrum, for the Sinclair machine, and B, kind of to show that to show like the skills of the individual kind of hobbies, right? Like I'm capable of doing this, and the Spectrum can handle it. But then like the real kind of, in terms of real use, I don't think it was very useful. Right? I think that there were probably like a few programs that you could kind of hack a little bit to kind of to control them with a mouse, but not much.
Yeah, I think the only 8-bit computer that I mean, a lot, maybe even all of them had a mouse of some sort, homemade or not. But the only system really that really had it catch on was the C64, I think, because it had the GEOS. And I think the Apple had GEOS too, but I don't think it was as popular on that system.
Yeah. So people were making like homemade mice, but they were also making homemade joysticks, right? But that's kind of common, but you couldn't really buy them in retail, so people were like building them themselves. And yeah, and just to kind of give you like a brief kind of overview what's in the book. So in the first chapter, Micros in the Margins, I kind of talk about the state of discourse around computers at the time. So what people thought computers are good for, and like the approach of the government to the computers, because it was a it was an oppressive regime, right? It was like a almost like a totalitarian kind of regime. And there were like no like civic liberties, and there was no free market and so on. So it was just like it was just more difficult to get a computer, to have to start a club, and to kind of, there was no you couldn't really write software and make money off of it, right? It just wasn't really possible. And the government wasn't really very much invested in kind of making 8-bit computers or home computers accessible or available to the people. They thought that, of course, I mean, they needed computing for like administrative stuff and for the like industry of, but it was just really hard to get home computers. So yeah, so it's about how difficult it was to actually get a computer, and how difficult it was to produce computers domestically. There were some kind of failed projects, and like interestingly, the only domestically produced home computer that was produced in like large quantities was a clone of the Spectrum. You cannot really see it here on the slides, but it was the didactic computer made in Slovakia. So it's another kind of Spectrum compatible machine, like an interesting machine. Yeah. I also talk about hunting down the machine. That's about how people actually bought computers, or how they acquired computers, because you couldn't really just go into a store and buy it most of the time. But most of the Sinclair machines that were in the country were self-imported. So somebody traveled to a Western country, but not everybody could. You had to have a special permit. You had to have friends who would go there and get it for you. But in the end, like, even though it was not like continuously available on the market, like there were over 100,000 people running Spectrums in the country, which is quite a lot. It was a country of like 15 million people and over 100,000 Spectrum users, so like a pretty decent sized community. And I'm kind of also trying to, and I think that's kind of interesting for like Timex Sinclair fans. I was kind of interested in why is that this platform became so dominant in this country, in Czechoslovakia. And I kind of found, like, I guess, like 2 or 3 main reasons. One is that at a certain point it was the cheapest machine available on the Western markets. So for people from Czechoslovakia who were like very kind of comparatively quite poor, it was like the only affordable option. It was very versatile, so you didn't need special hardware to operate it. Like you didn't need, as with Atari, you needed like a special kind of branded, right, tape player, a cassette player. With the Spectrum, you didn't. You just like, you could use like any kind of any tape player or any monitor, any TV or anything. And also, I think the third factor was that it was quite small, and which meant it was easier to smuggle, and because people did smuggle it into the country, because the customs fees for computers were quite high. So this made it easier for them. So yeah, in the end, Czechoslovakia became a Spectrum country, basically. I think the 8-bit Atari was the second major platform, and the Sharp MZ800 was the third platform, also pretty obscure computer. It has the Z80, so it's people were converting games from the Spectrum to the Sharp MZ800 a lot. It was possible. You could just kind of port it, do some kind of changes in the code, and it wasn't that difficult. So those were the 3 kind of major platforms in the country. Yeah, and I'll go a bit faster. So then there's a chapter about computer clubs, which were incredibly important in the country because there was no software markets and no hardware markets, and this was the place where you could get, the know-how, you could get to meet people, you could exchange software, and of course, people didn't really respect copyright for software at that time, so people just like freely exchanged software, Western copyrighted software. Then I have a chapter
I think that
about,
was much the same in the United States as well. I don't know if that
Yeah.
was different anywhere else, but here in America, that was, people just traded their software. A lot of them did.
Yeah, I imagine. In Czechoslovakia and in most of Eastern Europe, like there was no other option at all. So like, you could not kind of basically get your hands on an original copy, or there was like one or two like in the entire country, I would say. Then I have a chapter about kind of the discourse about computer games and why people thought that it might not be the best idea to just play games on computers, but also use them for other purposes. Then I have a chapter about kind of this informal distribution. So basically piracy, how people were copying games to one another and how this whole kind of system worked. Then I have a chapter about this bastard children of the West. That's about how people in Czechoslovakia started making their own software and especially games based on kind of Western examples. So they would take, there's an example there, Star Fox, right? It's a game that was made in Czechoslovakia. It doesn't really look like that. It doesn't. The information is not really there in the game. It looks like a Western game because they were just trying to kind of mimic those games that were coming mostly from the UK. So you wouldn't be able to say that it was a Czechoslovak game. So they kind of started out making these games that looked very much like Western games, trying to kind of match the programming skills of the Western professional kind of programmers. And then I have a chapter about it's called Empowered by Games, the games as a means of self-expression and activism, and that's about games that were somehow subversive and that criticized or fought against the communist regime. And there were plenty of games like that. Stano Hrda made one of them. It was this kind of satirical, very funny game, a parody of kind of these Soviet war narratives. It's a very cool game called Shatochin. And there were other games. Even I think like the most interesting game here is a game in which Indiana Jones, whom all of you know, he finds himself on Wenceslas Square, which is the kind of major square in Prague, during an anti-government demonstration. And he basically has to kind of fight the police and get out of the square. And it's like a very violent game, and it's a game that kind of wants to kind of bring attention to police violence, and it's basically like a game against police violence. So it's really interesting. Like these were some of the earliest activist computer games that were made worldwide, really. So I think these are really cool examples. And this Indiana Jones game is actually playable in English, and you can play it on the website of the book. But Stano has also kind of translated lots of, he took part in translating lots of other
I think something you might want to mention, if you can, is many of these games that were text-based, I think, according to your book, right?
Yeah, especially the games that I talk about in chapter 7. So these activist games, political games, there were many of them, or almost all of them, were text adventure games. Yeah, that was like probably the most popular genre among people who made games in the country. Because they were a bit easier to make in terms of assets, of course, but also in terms of programming, and also there was no competition from kind of professional Western titles because people in the country couldn't really, or very few of them could really kind of read English well, so they weren't able to kind of play text adventures in English, but they could play text adventures in Czech. So there was like a lot of text adventures being made in Czech or Slovak by people in the country. All kinds of topics, including these kind of activist games. Yeah, so yeah, so that was just like a intro about the book, and I'll be happy to, if you have any kind of questions or comments, I'll be happy to talk about it. And I'm also interested in hearing like what you do here in the group.
So Yaro, this is absolutely fascinating. I'm kind of coming at it from a slightly different direction. We have a we actually have a media studies department at the university in Buffalo here, and there's a lot of similar kinds of dissertations and publications that come out of it. I 7-ish years ago, I think I started working on preserving Timex Sinclair stuff, and my thought at the time was, all the other popular home computers from the 80s in the States, had reasonably large communities, right? And I didn't think that we really had a community here right now at that point in time. And certainly the level of preservation of material wasn't happening. So I started doing that, and I built this website, and then sort of serendipitously led to things like Stuart Neufeld contacted me and saying, "Oh, we should do a Zoom meeting," which is how we ended up where we are today. And Adam, well, going a little further back, we had a Yahoo group for a number of years, and then Yahoo went away and it got migrated to a new platform, and a bunch of folks migrated over, and there's a certain amount of interaction that can take place on email, but having these these nice face-to-face interactions is a lot more entertaining, and it just faster. But like you, I grew up with these things. I was a teenager when you were born. And the 1000 was my first computer, and the 2068 was the one I wanted to get next, but ended up going down a different path. And sort of out of this documenting all this stuff, the part that started to really interest me was the community, which is what you're talking about in essence. And when I found in documenting that our Timex community lasted well into the early 2000s. Like, there was a group that was still publishing a newsletter like up to 2003, off the top of my head. And so that's what that's kind of what I've focused my efforts on in terms of the website. And then I'm also working on a book about the Timex Sinclair community, because
Wait, is this breaking news? I don't remember you mentioning this before, or have I just totally forgotten?
I might not have mentioned it, but yeah. So I'm working on a book about the community in general, right? The folks who got a Timex Sinclair, or a Sinclair rather, who started with a Sinclair, the ZX80 or ZX81, because it was so affordable. As it was in Czechoslovakia, it was the most affordable computer, for people who did not want to punch in on a hexadecimal keypad. They wanted something that could connect to their TV, right? It was also sort of derided in this country because it was so small, and people think, well, you couldn't do anything real with it, and lots of people did really, they used it like I hesitate to use the expression a real computer, but they used it in ways that other people used their Apples or their Ataris or their Commodores. But the Timex folks, they were a very hardcore sort of group, and they always were, a much smaller group than any of the other home computers, user groups and stuff. But they were tenacious. They really stuck with it. Like I said, there was a real hardcore group of folks who were still working on a newsletter, putting out a print, newsletter up until 2003. And there's still folks here in the U.S. who are just, they're on this meeting, who are really interested in in the system. So one book about the community, somewhat similar to what you're doing, and then another book about just the 2068 subsect, right? Because there are folks like Adam and people who who buy one, who come in well after the 80s, right? And they buy this thing and then it's like, well, what can I do with it? And I want to have that thing. So here you go. Here's a book. It's this thick. This is what you could do with it. I just ordered your book, and so I'm really looking forward to reading it because it just was fascinating. And so here's another weird little connection. A few months back, I was listening to we have a network of public radio stations called National Public Radio, and then there's within cities, whatever, there's local public radio stations. And I was listening to our local public radio station, and there was a show about cassette culture, and in particular about people writing programs, and they interviewed the Fuchsoft guy, and of course the interview starts off with well, how do you pronounce this, and I that sort of happened at exactly the same time that Adam was reading your book. And so serendipitously, it all sort of came together, and Stano started posting and saying, hey, that's me. So this has been fantastic. This is really, it was really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I had like a little bit in that NPR, the Radio Lab.
That's it, Radio Lab, yes.
Yeah.
That was insane. That was, I'm sitting in my car, I'm like, what?
Yeah, it was a great episode. Yeah, definitely. And František Fuka was like the Fuchsov guy. Like he was like probably the most influential kind of person here on the Sinclair Spectrum scene in the 80s. Definitely. Like he made his games were like very popular in his demos and his music. Definitely. Yeah.
Very cool.
Interesting. Right?
And you said the Indiana Jones game is on your website?
So there's an English translation on the website.
Okay. So
you can play it in English, but it's not like the native translated version. It's rewritten for the web, so you can play it on the web. So it's cool. Which makes it like much more accessible.
Yeah.
So you can also, the original binary has been preserved. But it would be just very hard to kind of translate it from the binary. So we just rewrote it for the web.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
May I?
Yes, I was going to ask you to jump in.
We were inspired by Jaroslav when he talked in the book about those Czech and Slovak text adventure games. So we started project last year to translate some of such games, and we have a Museum of Design in Slovakia, which is archiving and preserving Slovak games. So we translated 10 games, mostly for Sinclair ZX Spectrum in binaries. So we have a good coder from the old Sinclair era helping us, and we are putting the translation into old ZX Spectrum files. So you can play them in emulator, or you can play them from SD card as step files. And this year we got also grant from funding to translate next 12 games. And we decided not only to translate Slovak games, because now there is a Czech Republic, Slovakia, so we, from Ministry of Culture, can translate Slovak games, but we voluntarily will translate also Czech games, and the Prestavba game, which is mentioned in the book of Jaro, it's an activist game, and I was very afraid to play this game in 80s because your task is to bomb the statue of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and from the ruins of the statue you will collect a golden brick, and you will emigrate to Western country with freedom and so. And we will translate this game in original binary for ZX Spectrum. So in few weeks or months, we will publish it, and we will give it to Jaro, and he will publish it in his web page probably.
That is so neat.
It will be good quality translation because we are involving our translators from University of Comenius in Bratislava. So this will be good quality translation, and we have a proofreader, English or American guy. So we will polish it to be playable. But you know, those
Well,
text
that's better
adventure
than
games.
most of the stuff that gets published here with translations. So, you know, if you have someone editing it, you're top shelf.
And when talking about Atari computers, the Sinclair was the first choice, and the Atari was the second choice in Czechoslovakia, because by some miracle, Jack Tramiel, he started his career selling Czechoslovak typewriter machines when he stopped the army service, and then he decided to make probably to pay back, and he imported Atari computers into Czechoslovakia. Even we have not exchangeable currency, he imported awesome bit 8-bit computers. So some games are programmed also for Atari, and we got 2 text adventure games for Atari, and we will translate them for Atari computers, so you can play in Atari emulator or from SD card on Atari 8-bit computer also. So we will cover Sinclair and Atari games.
That's so cool that you're able to get a grant to do this work. I mean,
we were happy because many portals were then publishing this, noticed that we translated the game. So Kotaku, The Vice, The Verge, so big portals were writing about Slovak games. So we are a small country, so we can give proof that translation made impact. And now I have a schoolmate, and he's in diplomatic service in Japan, and they are doing a small exhibitions of Slovak culture. So I told him that Slovak games, video games, are also culture, and Japan is full of video games, so it's a very big part of Japan culture. So we will make posters of Slovak games, loading screens from Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and we will make a small exhibition in Tokyo.
Nice.
With those games. So this will happen in autumn. We are preparing posters now.
So Stano and Jaro, have you talked to Joao at the Load ZX Spectrum Museum about this stuff?
Not yet, no.
So you should. I'll send you his contact information, because I think, you know, it's kind of tangentially related to what he's doing, but he's also doing some, you know, preservation of some of those machines, like the Didactic and the other machines that you guys built, your clones, as it were. Yeah, and I think he'd be really interested. That's really cool. So Jeff, you know, asked about the hard currency, and Stano, how, and Jaro, how did you guys? Well, Jaro, you said you used, you know, your dad's or something, but Stano, how did you and your friends get your computers?
So I was collecting money for 2 years when I was 14 or 15 years old.
Yeah.
And then after 2 years of collecting money as gifts from family and so on, I was able to buy a second hand Sinclair ZX Spectrum. And it was not normally in newspaper adverts, second-hand micros were very expensive because somebody took it from uncle in Switzerland and sold it in Czechoslovakia with big surplus in price. But there was a colleague of my mother, and he was able to be friendly and sell it to me for 2 salaries only of my mother. So I got my first Sinclair that way. And then I programmed text adventure games to amuse my friends, make them happy. And we were making jokes from Soviet army. So this is a Shatohin game. And the Prague colleagues, Fuchsoft, they inspired us because he was making Indiana Jones games. And I was all time very happy when new Indiana Jones text adventure game came. It was like reading a good book from your best author, preferred author, and new release. So I was very happy to play it, and it inspires me to make such games. And there was a big community in clubs which dealing what you are dealing now, like making memory expansions, modifications of ROMs. So some people were able to hack games by pressing enemy reset button, analyze them. There were guys making good assembler in Slovakia, memory resident system, MRS. So I was visiting one institution. They programmed it for bigger computers, but ported to Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and I was visiting them to get a copy. And then friends of mine, which were good coders in assembler, like Slavo Lapsky, who coded the demos for Timex, he made improvements in this assembler, so we were able to. Yeah, he made the version which is not address fixed to fixed address, so you can load it to any part of memory and program any other part of memory. So it was nice tool with full text editor, and so I was trying to program some machine code in this tool, but we were just teenagers. Nobody could sell software and get some money, so only very few people could program full realistic video games in comparable quality to Western market, because it was in free time, just voluntary programming. You could not sell games, so that's why we got only few games. Then when after Velvet Revolution, the free market economy came and freedom, I was publishing the first video game magazine, and we established the company Ultrasoft, and we published around 40 games for Sinclair ZX Spectrum, which were paid intellectual property to authors. And what I have seen, the big increase in quality. So new coders made very quality games for Sinclair ZX Spectrum in Czech Republic and Slovakia. At that time it was Czechoslovakia, and we distributed in whole Czechoslovakia. But you know, we were too late.
Where were
so
these?
market,
Where were
yeah?
these games sold once you were able to sell them? I mean, there was no computer shops yet or anything, right?
It was after Velvet Revolution, after 1989.
Right.
So the communism was gone. Václav.
Oh no.
Oh, we
we've lost
Oh.
Stano.
And we got market economy, we got transition. So before, in 80s, we have fictive companies like Sibyllasoft making text adventure games, but we could not register a company. We could not sell. The selling of something was prohibited because you lived in state planned economy only. But after the Velvet Revolution, in market economy, you could establish a company. So we established a limited company, Ultrasoft. We made agreements with authors. They produced games. We sold the tapes with original
I guess my question.
inlays.
I would. Are you there?
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, it's fine. You're pretty far away, so these troubles are understandable.
Yeah. So I'm in the car and the sound was turned off, so maybe you had a problem to hear me.
Okay.
So yeah, we made transition from communism to free market economy. So the first period was no selling games, very simple games, text adventure games for friends. In second period, free market economy, we established the company, me and my friend, and we distributed games, sold in shops. And we got magazine. We made advertisement in magazine, which was about video games. And we sold through magazine. You can order the games. We have sent tapes, but then floppies, tapes, mostly for Sinclair and Didactic Clone. So we sold thousands of copies of František Fuchsov game or Golden Triangle games from Prague and other authors, and the quality of games was much better because authors got intellectual property fees, so they were happy to code it and invest more time, and that was impressive. But we were late because the market in the West gone to PC, Amiga computers, and we were still using old Sinclair. We were poor, not so rich, so transition was uh, needing some time when we synchronized with the Western market.
Hmm. Where
Were
did
any
you?
of your? Oh, go ahead, David.
Where did you sell the games? Were there computer stores, or were they sold in like bookstores or something?
Yeah, there were big. Yeah, there was Didactic producing computers, and
Yeah.
he inserted in the box of computer ordering sheet that you could order more games from us. And then they told us they are happy because people they were selling hardware, and people were asking for software, and they were not able to sell software. So we were the first company helping them to somehow fill the gap in the market and offer the games. So they helped us. We published the magazine, and there was an ordering page in the magazine. So magazine sold 15,000 copies, and many readers would order the games on tapes, and we sent them through post office directly to buyers. And the new shops were popping up, so we were selling to shops, but those shops were small and buying small quantities. But we got very low price, so our game costed $2 only because people got low salaries. Western games costed like $50. So games for Amiga were still very expensive from West, and people were still making copies of games.
Well, you know,
But
that sounds similar to what happened in Europe, where they had the budget range, which were £3 for a game, but the authors would make more money selling them for that than they would for selling it for full price because it sells so many more copies.
yeah, exactly. That was happening. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, I'm just blown away. That's so cool to hear about this from both you guys.
Yeah, there was just like I think that's like one very kind of the interesting bit about Ultrasoft and their games. I think they might have been like one of the companies to put out like some of the last cassette-based releases of games for the Spectrum, or yeah, for the Spectrum compatibles. Because I think Twilight, it's an adventure game. I think it was released in 1995 for the Spectrum on cassette tape and on the floppy as well, which is pretty late. And it also I think it shows like the tenacity of the community, right? Like they of course, I mean, some of that was just that they didn't have a choice, right? Because like they didn't have money to buy a more powerful computer. But at the same time, I think there's something very admirable about how the community kind of lasted and how, you know, games were being made and released commercially until 1995 for the Spectrum.
Yeah, exactly.
I was
Wow.
looking at some of the opening screens and such that Jaroslav emailed to me. There's some really great artwork in those Ultrasoft games. It's amazing,
Yeah.
especially since they got such a late start in computer games.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So it looks like Evie has joined us, and so I want to switch gears and say hi to Evie. I'm going to let Adam, since Adam knows way more about what you've done, Evie.
Well, she knows the most, but
you do the intro.
I know Evie has done a cartridge called the Backbit cartridge, which is it's like one cartridge, I think, and then you have a piece that of ours an adapter for so you can use it with many other computers.
Backbit started out as a cartridge for the Commodore 64. I was working at the front counter of a video game museum here in Oakland, California. It's called The Maid. I'm not in touch with them currently because like they shut down their operations and I got really busy with Backbit. Anyway, so I started selling this Commodore cartridge. The first place I sold it was there was a Vegas event called CRX, Commodore Retro Expo. So like a handful of people there bought this cartridge. And at that time, I was making it with a Teensy. It's like similar to an Arduino. So that was like about a year. I was just doing the Commodore cartridge. And then there was some interest in doing like a Commodore Plus/4 cartridge and maybe doing an Atari cartridge. And I don't know, just these ideas for me as a developer, I just thought, it's like, well, why make a SKU for all these different machines when I could just make one device and then just make a little adapter for each other machine. So that's kind of how it started. And then I had to learn I had to teach myself how to do surface mount soldering. And that way I didn't have to depend on this Teensy device, because basically the Teensy, it's a microcontroller with their own bootloader and their own programming interface. And it's like, you can cut out the middleman and just take the hardware vendor's chip. And it's the one I use is by ST. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the the nitty-gritty of the hardware aspects of things.
Yeah.
But yes, STM CPUs are like impossible to get right now.
Yep.
Yeah, Evie, you don't have to be shy about talking about the hardware aspects. I think many of the people here can follow what you're saying.
So a little about my background. So my first computer was a Timex Sinclair 1000, and I guess my second computer was a Commodore 64. And so Sinclair really goes a little bit deeper for me on the computer experience, because I was probably about 5 years old when I first started playing with the Timex 1000. And just the color of the red and black color of those cassette tapes has this like really vivid kind of feeling and memory for me. And there was some game I played, and I remember because you don't have much in the way of graphic symbols. So there was like a dollar sign, and there's some game where like a dollar sign was important, and I still haven't found that game. I still don't know what it is. So I'm pretty sure it was one of those red and black Timex tapes. And I noticed in the archive, there's a few of those Timex tapes that just aren't in the archive. I made a list of like 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
Well, can you describe the gameplay at all, or just that there was a money sign in it? Because that's pretty vague.
It's so primitive in my mind. So like, for example, for the Commodore 64, there was this game I played, and all I remembered was it was like a yellow cartridge. And the story was that I guess my grandfather, who was in another country, my older brother sent him some cartridges, and like, you sent my favorite game away. And so for years, when emulators started being popular, like I guess in the 90s and 2000s, I was trying to find that game. And at first I thought it was like Rootin' Tootin' because it's similar, but then I figured out that the game was actually Diamond Mine. So if you go on my YouTube, I think the first video I made was about that whole story. So for me, like just the kind of mysteriousness of rediscovering the past is probably one of the most exciting things for me. Screen just went black. Maybe we should go to
the audio switching. I'm going to pin you.
There we go. Okay. Anyway, so where was that? So yeah, so rediscovering this old game. But
Evie, is that one reason why you have the black and red for your logo and everything?
It might subconsciously. I didn't do that on purpose. That's just the screen I use for my background on my computer, because it's not too disturbing at night with the nice soft.
Yeah. But you're right. Yeah, the old Timex 1000 cartridge or cassettes were black and red.
Anyway, so there's probably one of those games on one of those tapes that just hasn't been like, formally digitized into the, into the internets. So I'm a little curious about that. But anyway, so back to the back bit. I don't know, kind of went on a tangent there. Maybe someone could lead me back and tell me where I should go back to.
So you were telling us about how you developed it for the 64 and then, had the idea of generalizing it, as a piece of hardware.
Yeah, so okay, so my background is as a software engineer. And then I worked in the games industry for about 15 years, and then I just got super burnt out and just really wanted to do something else. So that's what led me to hardware. And so this was like a few years ago, I started, just diving into hardware. My dad happens to be a retired electrical engineer, so that's been helpful for my motivation to keep exploring, keep figuring things out. So as a like a software developer mindset, rather than making a separate cartridge for each machine, it's like, well, the core is the same. Why don't I just, have the core be the product and just stick an adapter? And so I was looking for a simple connector I could use, and I settled on a 40-pin connector, which is, I guess, like a hard drive connector, like the old ID hard drives. Goodbye to Yaro.
Bye, and thanks everyone.
Thanks for joining us. That was a great talk, and you've got a great book there. I encourage other people to pick it up.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for inviting me. Bye, everyone.
Okay, so and because I'm curious, I guess growing up, I'd read the magazines. I was a big user of like Run magazine and maybe Compute's Gazette, and you'd always see these pictures of other systems, and so I always had this curiosity as a child of, what's it like using these other systems. So now it's it's a much lower barrier to entry to get a whole new system. So I ended up just collecting a bunch of systems one by one, and I've had a couple of them donated to me. And I mean, the whole idea of Backbit was, okay, well, if I can load games through a cartridge board, it's basically emulating a parallel ROM. I can pretty much do that on almost any machine, right? So the concept kind of works on just about any 8-bit machine. 16-bit machines are a little more trying because RAM got faster, and so emulating memory at a higher clock rate is going to require more strict timing. But basically, the processor that's in Backbit can handle pretty much any 8-bit machine. So the first few adapters, I had some detection method to say, okay, based on the signals it's seeing on this machine, this is probably what machine it is. And that worked for the first few machines. And then I was like, wait, this is really complicated to try to guess what machine I'm hooking up to. And so I realized, okay, well, if I take this pin, which I normally use for the clock, and I don't know, set it high or low, and then if that's the case, then it'll look at these other pins, and based on what they're set to, it'll configure what machine's currently connected. So currently I have like 20 machines connected to this, and there's room in the firmware and the detection scheme to easily add probably another 10 or 15 more. And my curiosity is also extended by these machines having different processors. The Timex machines use the Z80, and that's actually really the most popular CPU for these old machines. I mean, I guess maybe the runner-up would be the 6502. And so because most of the code runs on the cartridge, there's not a ton of things that have to change for each machine. So I kind of set up, the whole infrastructure where I could, with minimal effort, get this working on another machine. And so I have a very minimalistic browser where it's just display a list of files, navigate by page, go up and down, and then I have these special command menus where you can do like a global command and a command specific to the item you've selected, and then look at the properties. And then I guess a feature that probably is a bit underused is the saves. So the saves don't work on every system because it implies
When you say
that you're-
saves, it saves as
Yeah.
a tape image. Is that what it does?
No, a save as like versioning. So for the Commodore, it emulates the disk, and so you save to the disk, and it'll save to the cartridge. And I wanted to create a versioning system because my frustration with other devices is that you put something on your SD card and you load it up on the computer and you do something that would modify the image, like maybe would add a high score, or maybe you trash something. And I wanted to make sure that I could always go back to the original. So I created this system with I don't know, it's probably kind of a unique approach because occasionally I'll design a feature and I'll just rack my brain for days or weeks just to think, how should I approach this? So by default, so there's original version, modified version, and then you can have a timestamped or named version. Do you need to emulate ROM? Yeah, so I do bank switching as well, for sure. A lot of systems use that. The cartridge has 1 megabyte of static RAM that can be used exclusively for serving data. So 1 megabyte is basically the limit for being able to support a regular banked cartridge. But if
that's not really a limit on these 8-bit machines, really, is it? I mean, honestly, are there cartridges that are that large?
Some people it is. I mean, some people want to do full streaming video.
Oh, okay, true. I've seen that. Like, I think I saw Dragon Slayer on the ZX81 that was done somehow, and I don't know how the hell it was done, but it's pretty impressive to see it.
So the other thing that I can do is emulate RAM. And it's particularly easier on these old machines because your memory map is flat. There's no bank switching. So just based on the address, you can say, okay, that's RAM and it goes here. So yeah, it was really tedious to get the Timex Sinclair 1000 up and running, just because the way the hardware works is using like the M1 to refresh, like the way it refreshes the display is pretty unique, and it was really tricky to just, I guess, basically to only serve requests that were needed to be served, and to turn off the internal RAM at the right time so I could substitute it. And so once in a while I encounter some kind of signal handling issue that really boggles my mind and takes me, maybe takes me a week to crack. But I'm pretty persistent.
A whole week, huh?
Oh, okay.
Well,
So-
see, I do this full time. I know a lot of people who I mean, a lot of people that I've seen. I don't know about you guys. They'll have a day job and they just do this on the weekend. This is my full-time thing because I just kind of fell out of favor with having to report to a boss. It's just I'm a bit single-minded in a lot of ways.
So Evie, I want to ask you a couple geeky tech questions.
Sure.
You're sniffing the boss in order to determine the system. That's awesome. That's really crazy. And you're using the you said it's an STM chip. It's from one of the teensy.
No. So the first,
no, I mean, not from it,
the
but
first backbit was the teensy, and I think they use like FreeCell, which got bought out by NXP or something.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
Anyway, or Microchip, or anyways, but I'm using STM. Okay, so what happened a year in? I wanted to support these games on Commodore called Easy Flash, and they needed a full megabyte of RAM, and I only had like 128K on the teensy.
Yeah.
And then also to support like the +4 and Atari, they have like 2 megahertz buses versus the 1 megahertz Commodore bus. So I needed something a little faster. And so I ended up just redoing the whole hardware so that I could put, so that I could just not have to depend on Teensy and just go straight to, just put the chip on a board. So I had to learn a lot of things to make that happen.
And so the Teensy, at least the later devices, use a BGA device. Are you using a
BGA ball grid?
Ball grid, yeah. Versus
no, so I do
using
everything I do has legs. I use
okay.
I use like the back bed has a LQFP 100 low profile quad flat pack.
Yeah.
And so I solder those by hand.
Oh my god.
It's probably possible to do the no lead package, the DFN package.
Yeah.
But at some point, I guess I was trying to mount a crystal, and crystals they don't make with legs,
right?
If you're doing surface mount, and I had so much difficulty. And in retrospect, I think the difficulty was that I was using a third-party debugger probe, which just wasn't compatible with the latest generation of chips, and so it would work about half the time. And I thought it was a hardware issue, and I literally spent. Okay, so I said 1 week was a long time. I spent about 3 months beating my head against the wall, not literally, but dealing with the fact that I built something and about half the time it just wouldn't work, and I had this stack of not working boards, and I thought it was something with my soldering method or maybe the capacitance of the crystal. And finally at the end of the day I said, well, why don't I just buy an STM probe, because I was using a third-party probe like a Sager, and I said, well, why don't I just try the STM probe? And I got the STM probe, and boom, just everything just worked.
It's crazy.
So yeah, so latest generation chips, don't trust the third-party tools.
That's awesome. That's cool. That's really cool. So
I have a general question that's going to involve you, Evie, but it's for the people in this group. I know that Carl Miles has your TS 1000 cartridge. I was wondering if anyone else here does, and if you used it, and if I'm not trying to, I kind of want a review of it from someone who's actually used it. Maybe Carl, you can say something about it if you're still listening.
Well, Evie just sent it to me, so I don't have it yet, but it's in the mail.
Okay.
But I did see it quite a while ago, and I have her. She has a Retro Chip Tester Pro kind of thing too that you can test chips in, and kind of again, I think it's more from her Commodore time, but because it tests the actual Commodore chips, right? The SID chip, the PLA, and stuff like that. You can actually just put the chip in there, and it'll run it through its paces. But so I do have that, but yeah, the cartridge thing. Was intriguing just from the standpoint that I haven't seen anybody. Well, I mean, there's the ZX Expand. There's some other similar devices, right? But they're just specifically for the Timex, right? And I am collecting more machines as well. And I was thinking, well, that's a good idea. That way I can run, if I get some Commodore 64s or some TI-99As, I can use that to load software on multiple machines. So, but yeah, I don't have it yet. She would, like you mentioned, they're hard to get. And I know some folks are actually looking at alternatives, right? Using alternative microcontrollers for their designs, because the ST ones are just impossible to get right now. But so yeah, when I get it, I do have the TS1000 adapter, and then I got the Spectrum one as well, so I'll try it on the Spectrum.
Yeah, I'll be getting she also has made an adapter for the Astrocade of all machines. I don't know how I don't know how or why she decided to support the Astrocade, but good job.
I got an email from someone on Atari Age, and they said, this is probably a crazy idea, but can you support the Astrocade? And then I signed up for the Astrocade. There's a group.
Yeah, the groups.io.
Yeah. And then I was looking at the possibility if somebody could set, like, I had this idea, maybe someone could send me their old junk and I can fix it because I like fixing stuff. And but what often ends up happening, if someone's not real anxious to get rid of something they have in the closet, I'll just, wait till I find a half decent price on eBay and just go grab it. I mean, if I can get a system for like less than $100, it's like, why go through the trouble of like, getting it loaned out from someone, and paying for shipping and risking it getting lost in the mail. And, and I kind of beat things up. I'm a bit heavy-handed when I go and repair these machines because, I just want to make things happen. Like, I actually, and speaking of which, I just got a 2068.
Oh.
I found a half decent price on one. The symbol key didn't work, and so I had to rip off the whole front of the keyboard. And I'm hoping there's a way with heat to kind of get it flat again. But you can't open the keyboard without peeling the sticker off the top.
Right.
And
there's a person in Germany who's
sells new ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or Poland.
Yeah, no, but actually I opened it up and I don't know if someone spilled coffee. There was definitely some brown stuff inside, and I think it was probably just rust. So someone probably spilled water on this at some point.
Yeah, and symbol shift's a pretty important key. So yeah.
Yeah.
At least on that machine.
So I opened it up and there was actually just some kind of like rust powder, and I cleaned out all the rust powder with alcohol, and all the keys work fine now. But I got to go back in there because in fact, there's a little staple looking thing that goes in the cap shift key, and it's probably on the floor again.
Yeah, because
I don't know. I can't. No, here. Can you see on the camera?
Yeah.
The little metal.
So this flung across the room.
Evie, you are a hardware geek, I'll tell you.
Because I know I had some conversations on the forum that Evie has about the 2068, because there's no adapter yet, right, for the 2068.
Well, there actually is.
Oh well, I'm sure you probably made one.
Okay, so I figured out why. The pinout's different from the Spectrum, because they wanted to have the pinout line up with the ZX81 or Timex 1000.
Right.
So I took my Timex 1000 adapter. Of course, you can't.
If you hold it closer to your, it'll work out better.
So So I just added a few pins on the end, because that's gonna be the board that I'm gonna make. It's just the ZX81 plus a few extra pins, and I'm debating whether or not it should have a Kempston joystick. So I guess my biggest question is, are you guys using the 2068 to take Spectrum, to try to run Spectrum software, or do you want to specifically run 2068 software?
Yes.
Yes to everything.
Well, there already
Yes,
is
both.
one that you can use to load up the Spectrum software and on the Spectrum, and well, that does work on the 2068. Am I getting this right, David? Make sure I'm
Well,
not...
you can use the twister. You can get
yes,
a twister.
exactly.
Right. Well, or a Spectrum ROM. Yes, and you can then run stuff.
Right, and then it has the joystick. At least the one that David sells has the joystick adapter built in.
No.
Right?
No, not yet.
No.
No, I've not gotten to that one to work yet.
Oh well, don't listen to anything I have to say.
Right. Don't listen to Adam. But the vast majority of software that was sold in the US uses the 2068 joysticks. And I assume, I don't know that much about Spectrum games and stuff, but I assume that the majority of Spectrum games use the Kempston.
Yeah, that's true. Or actually, nearly all of them have just keyboard controls, because many people didn't even have a joystick for their Spectrum.
Right.
So, not that that's an ideal way to play your games, but I've tried it, and you get used to it on the Spectrum, or on my 2068 using the Spectrum ROM to play Spectrum games at the wrong speed.
And actually, the one I got came with this power stick. I don't know why they call it a power
joystick. That's a great joystick.
It's kind of it's very small.
Yeah, that was the joystick I used to use on my Commodore 64 and back in 84-ish. Yeah.
Looks like a medical device.
So
I
want to see
far
Evie and Jeff B. I want to be a fly on the wall here. Maybe you guys can talk about, because you have a common goal. So Evie, Jeff is also making something similar to what you're doing here.
Okay.
Why don't you guys talk? You don't have to talk now, but
Well, just give me
communicate
a brief overview.
Yeah, Jeff.
Well,
Yeah, Jeff.
my interface is primarily based around FPGAs, and the essential features were going to be to have some expanded video modes, including the ULA plus, and then also be able to talk to SD cards the way that the peripherals do today with
Cut
the
out the middle,
Spectrum
yeah.
without the twister board. So that's essentially what I was going for. And right now I'm working on just paring that back, since my stuff is made of unobtainium now as well. And you can't, I've been looking around, you can't find FPGAs for love nor money. So
yeah, I ordered a batch of chips back in October, and I finally got them a couple weeks ago. And
Kind of
those are
surprised they
probably going to
arrived.
sell out in about a month or two, and then I'll order another batch, and God knows how long those will take.
yeah, it's insane out there. But at any rate, that's where my particular design is heading. And I've got the video working. That's been working for a while, although I'm going to give that up since I really need an FPGA for that. And I'm working on an SD card interface that uses the Raspberry Pi Pico to essentially run all of the OS stuff, and then you just talk to it from the 2068 using a CPLD and a SPI bus.
So I see in the chat here, you said, I mean, I already referenced the bank switching, but yeah, so I actually do a lot of my code in assembly language. It's ARM assembly. Yeah, so I do a lot of the nitty gritty.
Yeah, that must be fun.
You know, it's kind of crazy at first, but you kind of just start seeing patterns in the wilderness. I mean,
How are the tool sets?
You know, like I don't even have, in my assembly code, I don't even have variable names, like registers 1 through 12.
What's the ecosystem like for doing ARM assembly language programming? Is it pretty bare bones, or?
I code most of my stuff in C, and to do assembly, I just do a block of assembly inside a C program. Like
okay.
That's how I've been doing it. I mean, basically, I'll do something kind of the most brute force way, unless I have to change it. Like probably the first iteration of software, everything's on like one file, and then there's too much there, so I had to create folders and and then I call each routine a handler. Each routine for each machine is a handler, and then I call different data types, and so. Other people probably wouldn't want to see my code even if they could, but it's something that makes sense in my brain.
So you're not going to put it up on GitHub for public exposure then, huh?
Not currently. I mean, basically, because this is my full-time gig right now, and I don't really have any other means to support myself. Things are closed source, but I have other interests, and I'm interested in music and synthesizers. So who knows, if I make it big in synthesizers, a few years from now, that this stuff could end up open source.
Well, you could make especially with that ST, you could make some nice Eurorack modules.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as going to music, I made a SID replacement chip, and I'm having a hell of a time right now figuring out the potentiometers, because I already have two. I'm not interpreting them according to the old-fashioned capacitance discharging method.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interpreting them with more modern methods, and that I have it working on paddles. I have it working on a Commodore Mouse, which uses pulse width. But now someone's trying to do koala pad, and that doesn't work. And I'm guessing it uses some kind of resistance method.
Well, actually, yeah, the QualiPad is resistance. And somebody who's on with us, Stuart, used to run a company called Zebra, and back in the late-ish 80s, he designed a little add-on for the 1000 and the 2068. And I think Stuart could, correct me on this, but I think he used the very common 8-bit DAC available, 8-bit ADC available at the time to sample the two Koala,
Yeah, I designed a little A to D using, I think it was ADC08 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only difference between it as I use it as a joystick adapter, or when it went with the pad, I think the X and Y on the QualiPad were just like potentiometers. Really, you were tapping a voltage off of, like you would get out of a potentiometer for X, Y.
Right.
So
With the QualiPad on the you could hook it up on the Atari and just play any of the paddle games.
Yep,
anything like that.
So-
It's pretty cool. To
So
do that.
I have a customer who has a QualiPad, and I had them look at the voltages, and the voltage reading on the potentiometers changes when you plug the thing in, but it didn't change based on where the stylus was. And he hooked it up to original SID, and it's working. So I think it must be sending, I don't know exactly electrically what's going on, but it's like sending a constant voltage, but the resistance is changing. And so I have a ADC in the CPU, and it works fine with paddles, but it's not working with the QualiPad, which is really bizarre.
that's pretty weird.
Yeah, I think you have to look into that more.
I told him to read the resistance with the multimeter.
I would think the documentation, the schematic of a QualiPad being as simple.
I
as
haven't found a schematic. I've seen
on it.
pictures of the board, but I haven't seen a schematic. It's not very complicated. There's like
No. I mean, I would think the schematic ends up being 2 potentiometers, but I don't know. I have a question to Evie. You're trying to make some money on this, but I just checked on eBay, and when I put in Backbit, I don't find you.
So I sell through the Backbit store, and that way I don't have to pay eBay fees. And also eBay customers I've found are a little more rude than customers that come directly to my store. they try it out for a day, and then they say, "Oh, I don't like it. I want a full refund."
Oh, okay. Anyway,
but I get I think probably most of my customers come through YouTube. They see my YouTube videos and they go to my store, and so I'm I don't have a big problem trying to. I mean, I'm not super high volume, but I move enough units to keep going. And obviously the bigger issue right now is the supply chain with the chips.
Yeah, right. Everything's hard to get. Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that folks know that this cartridge is really an SD player for multiple machines, right? It's not anything specific to the Timex, but she does have the two, the Sinclair the ZX81 and the Spectrum, and apparently soon the 2068 as well.
Each machine has its nuances, and I have a lot of custom code for each machine, whether it's a bank switching machine, whether it's a bank switching routine, or supporting like writing to the cartridge, and so like MSX, you can write to the cartridge, and my versioning system will tap into that. And then
one thing, go ahead. Well, one thing I was going to mention is that on the 2068, there's obviously tons of British software, right, for the Spectrum. But, maybe I'm just thinking as a feature set for the 2068 version is maybe that, you can say, well, this is a Spectrum game in your directory, and says, well, I'm hooked up to the 2068, for instance, and says, well, maybe you can have the Spectrum ROM in there. And so if you pick that game, right? It'll reboot the 2068 using the Spectrum ROM, so it'll run. You know, it just makes it way easier. You don't have to have a twister board.
Mm.
You know, it'll just load up the.
Usually what I do for like a BIOS replacement is I'll have an option in the main. So there's 4 menus, and like on the Commodore, the F1, F3, F5, F7. But for other but for other machines, it's like literally the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have to push like shift or function. So I guess
Use symbol shift.
yeah. So the first menu, I'll have a BIOS replacement, and like it works really well for the PC Junior. You can just say use. So on the PC Junior, they have a BIOS called Quicksilver, which makes it so the memory counting at the beginning, if you have like 512K or 640K of memory, it's really slow counting up the memory. And Quicksilver is a BIOS replacement cartridge, and so like in the menu, you can say use Quicksilver as your BIOS, and then you can also go run a program. So I think my default for the 2068, assuming that you can do ROM replacement on there, I guess you can.
You can.
Is you'll go in the menu and you say here, this is F1 menu, or sorry, the menu for key number 1, and this is the BIOS I want to use. This is the BIOS ROM I want to use, and then you can run programs and it'll use that BIOS ROM.
So Evie, there's a signal on the 2068 bus called BE, which stands for Bank Enable. And
there's 3 custom signals on there.
Right, but if you, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, if you pull that one low, is it active low? Okay, you pull it low, and it disables all the internal memory, all the ROM and the RAM. So it's a great way to just
So what so the 3 extra wires I added for XROM, ROS CS, and BE, those are all gonna be hooked up to the cartridge.
Evie, one thing to be careful of is if you do assert BE, then ROS chip select and XROM cannot be counted on to give you what the memory map of the machine is.
Right. The XROM pin is good if you're not replacing the memory. It's good for telling you when XROM gets activated.
Right, but you still have access to the whole address bus, so you can use that to figure out.
Yeah, the thing is you just have to monitor and latch the outputs to port FF and port F4. Yourself, and then
for the IO.
IO ports FF and F4. They're the ones horizontal stat. Well, you probably know that, but I found that to be an ugly surprise because when I disabled the onboard ROM, I also lost all control of I lost ROS chip select and XROM coming out of the machine. So I had to go ahead and keep those inside my FPGA.
I mean, I would say with doing things CPU based, I have in some ways it's more flexible, in some ways it's less flexible. I do envision doing FPGAs down the road, but like with I bought a couple FPGA development boards, and they're just sitting on a shelf because I kind of, if I don't have something that can be manufactured in mass, then it's kind of like, oh, I'll work on that later.
Yeah.
Oh, I had one more question for you, Evie. What do you use for level translation? Because I'm assuming your ST.
Okay, so STM is unique because all of their pins are 5-volt tolerant.
Okay.
And so it can handle TTL coming in, it can handle CMOS coming in. Going out, it's like a low voltage CMOS.
Yeah.
But I have yet to see any issues with that. Like the only thing I've really had an issue with as far as the 3.3 volts is like when I wrote tests for a particular CPU, I don't know if it might have been the Z80. Yeah, so certain brands of Z80 really want a 5-volt clock signal. And so like that's the only thing I found where it, not having the 5 volts really made a difference. But even that I made a workaround for.
Jeff, who was just talking, turned me on to a really nice version of the 74-245, which does bidirectional voltage translation. It's
so because the pins are 5-volt tolerant, and because TTL can generally function fine with a 3.3 volt signal, I haven't really had issues with, like, I mean, obviously having an extra bus would offer you more protection, but these latest generation STM chips are incredibly advanced and have a lot of stuff built in. Like on my chip tester, I added some small resistors and some Zener diodes to offer a little more protection from weird signals. But the STM CPU itself has TVS diodes built in.
wow.
And so the biggest problem I've found is it's actually less about the signals coming in. It's more of, if you're trying to drive a signal, these things drive signals so hard where if you're driving a signal too hard, you might burn up the pin. So really, the main issue I've found with these CPUs is if you're trying to drive a signal more than like 20 milliamps, then you're gonna burn up the CPU.
Yeah, and speaking of the chip tester, Evie designed that to actually do in circuit, right? So because that's a big thing with especially Commodore 64s, right? I mean, most of those damn chips are soldered in. So which one's bad? Where you can hook her chip tester pro, to the chip in circuit and actually.
So in circuit is an interesting story, because originally I did in circuit tests because I wanted to be, because I guess I wasn't as good at desoldering back then, and I wanted to be able to diagnose chips without having to desolder. I've improved my desoldering skills, and I'm more confident with doing that. The thing that changed with in-circuit testing, the first chip tester didn't have any resistance on the I/O lines, and so it basically just drove things really, really hard. Like it drove the whole, like it would power the whole bus for all the chips, and it would really force the I/O signals higher, low, and so it was very brute force. When I did the chip tester pro, I would say I had maybe like just 3 customers who say, "Oh, my chip tester blew up." It wasn't very common, but I wanted to offer more protection from things blowing up, and oddly enough, the failure usually comes internally from driving things too hard. It's these modern chips are very well protected from like over voltage conditions, and so when I put resistance on the lines, then all of a sudden that brute force, I mean, basically current limiting, when I put current limiting on the lines, that brute force method didn't work anymore. I said, oh no, now how do I do in-circuit testing? And so that's why I did this thing I call private eyes, which is, it's part of Plaster now. So Plaster is my PLA substitute. Everyone's PLA substitute is a cute name with the letters PLA. So I chose Plaster. And so Private Eyes was just a chip with some pull-up resistors on it. And so I just incorporated that into my PLA replacement. And when I did that, I had to add a diode on each pin, because if you have, if you want to have
Evie, I just want to say we have about 25 minutes left, and maybe if anyone has any last questions for Evie, I think there's a couple other people who, if we have time, I would like to hear from. I wanted to hear from Jeff B. Maybe just talk a few minutes about how you were able to get David's stuff to compile, and you were able to make it public so that people could use the ROM's source code.
Let me just finish up about in-circuit testing real quick. So by having pull-ups on the chip select lines, that solves most of the bus conflicts that you'd have with in-circuit testing. Now I've posted saying, I can create a test plan for other machines, and the first obvious one would be the C128. But so far, I haven't had anyone saying, I want, coming to me saying, I want to do in-circuit testing for this machine. So when someone comes to me and says, can you do in-circuit testing for X machine? I will be happy to explore that. But until then, it's kind of like, until I have a specific demand, it's kind of like, you know, it's a lot of work to do just for no reason.
Well, I mean, Evie, if you want to do in-circuit testing for the 2068, I certainly wouldn't object.
Okay. Yeah, post a message on the forum.
Okay.
Look into it.
Well, really, the only chip in there to test would be
It's
the
the
ULA.
SLD. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing with in-circuit testing that can be really frustrating is I have this chip clip, and I just tried to do an in-circuit, I don't know, a couple different things. I was trying to do like an in-circuit ROM reading on a cartridge, and it wasn't working. And I think some of my test leads are not making good contact. So actually, these are probably the wrong thing to use, because the clip pins are a little thicker than normal pins, and I don't think these are making good contact.
Yeah, and the other thing on the chip tester, well, the chip tester Pro is the one I have, but it can read cartridges, so you can put cartridges onto it, and it'll you can actually, you know, get a image of the cartridge. I mean, there's other tools that kind of do that too, but it's just another feature of that particular tool that Evie has, because it has an SD card slot on it, right? So.
Well, does anyone have any last questions for Evie before we maybe move on to Jeff, or let's see, David, if you want to tell us about any updates on your site, or Tim Horner, who could tell us about the digitizer that he's been working on.
I'm just happy geeking out.
Hey, I'm having fun.
But anyway, before we get on, just want to thank Evie for coming in. And,
oh yeah, that's awesome.
You know,
yes,
I'm a big supporter of your products, and I'm waving your flag.
Evie, I'm looking at your chip tester right now.
Thank you. That's what keeps me going.
So David, why don't you start us off? Maybe tell us the last few updates you've done to your website.
Oh, well, I think I mentioned that I got, you know, a third box from Jack, and I sent Jack off a check to reimburse him for nearly $90 worth of shipping. It was really nice of him to, you know, to do that. And the third box contained, as it turned out, lots of issues from the Long Island Sinclair Timex group, and then a bunch of folders from people that he sold software, hardware for, whatever, including one from, there's a folder of stuff just from Keith Watson, who's with us today, for his, I think it was Make DOS or something like that. So those things are scanned, they are on archive, and I'm working on bringing them into the site, just in terms of being listed. There's almost a complete collection of SyncLink now, you know, and CATS, actually, the Capital Area Timex Sinclair group from Washington, DC, is almost complete. It's astounding. The amount of stuff that both Don Lambert and Rod Gowan and everybody else who sent stuff to Jack over the years, it seems like, has been amazing.
Yeah, I noticed you have a shortage of Czech stuff, though.
Well, you know, this is a website about America.
I was going to say, David, you haven't come across any of my time, although I think it was the New Mexico Timex Sinclair user, NMTS. I don't know where my originals are. I'm sure they're in the garage somewhere. I haven't found them, but I know I sent some of those out to some of the other user groups, and I was
need to dig those out, because actually I did see your name and a mention about your group in something I scanned, and I messaged Adam about it.
I know I have my original somewhere, at least I hope I do, but I know I sent some of those out. I mean, it may be only 4 issues, I think maybe we did, but you know, we did some. Yeah,
dig them out, see if you can find them. I love that kind of stuff, obviously.
Yeah, I had to use an actual real typewriter before I got the printer, the 2040 printer, but that was rough.
Yeah. So Jeff Burrell.
Yes.
Talk to us about how much work it took to convert, you know, in assembling that document. I wanted to make it human readable, right? And instead of having jumps to hex addresses that you then have to have some sort of physical lookup
But
table.
David, why don't you just tell people, because in case someone jumps across this and they've never heard about this before, just give like a 2-minute or 1-minute background about what the heck we're talking about.
So multiple someones over the course of time have disassembled the 2068 main ROM, the home ROM, and the expansion ROM. And they have done a good job of trying to suss out, what those things are doing. And it's really easy to figure out the routines that came from the Sinclair ROM. What's less easy to figure out are the routines that handle the bank switching and the communications to the bus expansion unit. By the way, I learned that Timex planned that you would be able to connect 2 bus expansion units, not just 1. But if you really wanted to go whole hog, you could get 2 of those suckers. And so there's this whole expanses of code in the ROM that have not been very well disassembled and commented. And so I've spent a fair amount of time working on that. And Jeff mentioned Jeff was working on his project, and he mentioned something, and I was like, oh, I've got this document, maybe this will be helpful to you. And my goal in doing this work is to make it human readable, so that somebody can sit down and read through it and say, oh, okay, now I get it. I see what's happening here, and I can use it in whatever ways. And one thing I find frustrating is jumps or calls that go to that then list a hexadecimal address, and you have to go look that up to see what routine is being jumped to, even if it's commented. And so I've gone through and replaced all those hex addresses on the calls and the jumps with a shorthand name for the routine. Obviously, that then makes it difficult to compile it back into a binary. And so Jeff, you spent a little time, it sounds like.
I spent probably 3 days going through both the home ROM and the X ROM, and actually it wasn't that difficult. The two biggest issues were reformatting everything, because when I brought it in from the main document, comments were all over the place. So it was just basically getting everything reformatted, and most of the addresses had hyphens in them, which the assembler doesn't like because it thinks you're trying to do arithmetic. So I had to go through and change some names. And the other advantage to doing that is in the process of reformatting and everything, I got to read comments and get a better understanding what's going on with the ROM, which has really helped a lot. So essentially, I just made sure it would compile byte for byte with the
Jeff,
ROMs.
did you basically because when I've worked on disassembling stuff with the Z80 on the Astrocade, what I've done is I've made a header file which basically is just full of equates. So like you would just is that what you ended up doing?
Well, I ended up I along with the assembler files is basically a list file or a header file that has all of the equates that are necessary in there. So, and it's turned out to be a big help. And essentially now working on my project and using the file that David provided, I'm cheating a lot and going through and changing some areas of the ROM to make it easier to hijack it and get my code to run. Yeah. Which for me is not a big problem because I load the ROMs from the SD card anyway.
So Jeff, do assemblers work better with an underscore in the name or camel case?
Underscores, and when I redid the labels, I just put them in camel case because that's what I preferred. So
okay, I think I'll do that. I think I'll work on the camel case.
I have to look at your document, David. But do you have like say it could cause the keyboard routine? Do you, or any routine for that matter? Do you have an explanation of what it's expecting? you know, like the A register needs to, this holds, you know, a key scan code, or, you know, or like you're going to do a print screen routine, you know, where this register holds the, you know, the character you want to print out, you know.
What the routine like is expecting. Yep.
Right. Is there a cheat sheet that you have? Okay.
Yeah. So it's right there. When you get to that routine, there's you know, a paragraph or multiple paragraphs that sort of give it a, you know, give you an English language translation of what's supposed to be happening and what it's going to expect and what it's going to return if it returns anything.
Okay.
And then
a lot of times you have to push stuff onto the stack, right?
Yep.
And it expects, and it's going to pop them off. Yep. Right. Okay.
Yep. Or it wants something in a certain register or a couple of registers. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I have to look at that doc. That's interesting.
It's a really great resource.
And so is Jeff, Jeff Mazur still with us. The third-party programmer's guide that Jeff sent provides a lot of insight into you know, the code in the XROM that would have dealt with the bank expansion unit, which, you know, is of no use to anybody except for the fact that it goes unexplained, you know, in large part, you know,
it was still prototype code anyway.
Yeah.
You know, even in the real units, but it'd be nice to see what they were trying to accomplish there.
Yeah. So
one thing I found looking at David's document is that you want to bank switch as little as possible, because the amount of code that gets run to do that is just incredible.
Isn't it astounding? There's this whole passage of routine that exists in, you know, in so many places, and it's the exact same piece of code of, you know, push everything up and then go do this thing and then, you know, come back from the home ROM and pull everything back down. And yeah.
Well, plus it probably had to have that code copied to every single bank, right? So it would have a common,
that's
you know, it could run the common code no matter what bank you were in.
Actually, they put most of that code just below the system variables in RAM. So they assume that you never switch out chunk 2. Oh, I'm sorry, chunk 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to interject here. I was working on the Atom, and it had this whole crazy thing that you had to do to switch code.
Oh,
you had to like jump. You had to bank out you had to go to this routine and bank out this other thing, and then jump over here and bank out the other thing, and then go back.
Yep. Yep. That sounds about right.
You do like the obscure machines, don't you, Evie?
Yeah. I didn't enjoy trying to do bank switching on the Atom. That was not fun.
Trying to follow that stuff will either A, make your hair turn gray, or cause your ears to bleed, one of the two. So I'm not sure.
Well,
we just have about 10 minutes left. I was hoping maybe we could hear from Tim Horner a little bit.
Yeah, Tim.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
Tim,
why don't you tell us how your project's going with the digitizer? And I think did you get to a point where you could test it yet?
No, not yet. The I've tested all the timing sections. I haven't done the little interface, the I/O port, but that's just a standard I/O port. But yeah, so where am I at? David entered the original. Oh, sorry, it's the digitizer. So essentially, it's a tool that takes NTSC video and lets the 2068 scan in into it's very slow. It takes about sort of between 5 and 10 seconds to do a page. So that's what the purpose is. David's put the original schematic in. I've done a few tweaks. I've routed the board, so I'm just going to spin up I don't think it's worth putting on breadboard because we're largely sure it works. It's just maybe a couple of the capacitors or something will be different. So I'm just going to spin up the board that I routed. So I'll send that off today, and then maybe in a week or so's time we'll get a board back. That'll be like my green version one. They're always faulty. Yeah, first spin up of the board is just if it works, it's like a bit of code working the first time you've tried to run it. So yeah, that's where I'm at. It's and so there's the original.
I think you were saying that there was one part, or at least one part, that was hard to find or maybe impossible to find now, and you replaced it with something else. Is that right?
Well, I had suggested using a microcontroller instead of the 556, which is a timing signal generator. The 556 is used to count across the screen. And so what happens is that this device counts the lines down, and when it hits it samples its way across, but for each step across it goes vertically. And the 556 fine. I mean, it's good. Lots of people use it for lots and lots of things, but I was thinking, why not have an even more stable timing signal?
Well, that's a heck of a way to complicate it, man. Going from a 556 to a microcontroller.
Oh, but come on.
Well,
I'm all about
the easy to make it right. The software is easy to make it work that way, but I mean, that's a heck of a hardware jump. But I get it.
I'm all about the 8-pin pick.
Well, yeah, the AT Tinies, yep.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Tim. I didn't mean to. But
no, it's all good. But you do give up with it'll be then discretely timed, whereas at least the 555, it's got like a little adjustment that you can sort of stretch the screen, and so that's an analog adjustment, and so it's actually I mean, there's no problem with using the microcontroller, but it's now going to be down to the 100 nanosecond or whatever it is, the timing. It's going to be fixed on a digital point, not quite as and typically you don't have a floating point. Well, Evie does in her STMs, but the little micros don't have floating points, so it'd have to be integer multiplied. So you sort of do lose a bit of flexibility by going to a micro for doing that bit of the timing.
That's true. Yeah.
So anyway, we'll do a version 1, which is just exactly the same. There's a couple of little substitutes, but they're pin compatible substitutes. And then we'll do a version 2 that sort of we somewhat take some more liberties and make it a bit simpler to build and cheaper and easier to get the bits for. I've disassembled the whole. There's a type-in the Sync magazine. I've disassembled the machine code for that, and I've commented almost all of it. I'll put that up in the next couple of days.
Wonderful.
Interesting enough, they swapped the hardware around for Michael's board. So the one of the I/O ports is actually at the other end. The D7, D0 have been flipped around. So the actual software seems to work with the original one. I think from my initial reading of the software, they've just moved the things around, I assume, for ease of making the PCB. So that's just a little caveat that I found when I was doing the disassembly. I was going, hang on a second, should be D7, but it's actually D0. So they've swapped a few things around.
Cool.
Now, the code from the book doesn't actually even allow you to save your screen, or am I mistaken there?
It does straight to the screen. So it scans. It actually has because the Sinclair screen isn't in order. There's one row, and then it does 8 rows down, and then 8 rows down. So there's a big lookup table in the code, and essentially what it does is it scans and uses the lookup to find out where line 1, column 1 is, and then and so on across, and then it scans where's line 2. So it has to look up, and so what it does is dumps from the digitizer straight to screen, to screen memory at 4000 or whatever the mode 0 screen sits at.
It's funny you should say that, Tim, because literally just the other day I was looking. I think it was a version of the third-party programmer's guide that got published in List, the Long Island Sinclair Timex newsletter, and it mentions this routine in ROM called Scramble, which you feed it a certain thing, it tells you where that spot on the screen is, which they could have used, had they known.
It's quite tight timing in there. So in their particular case, the lookups, they just increment through a lookup table, hold at one of the registers. So you couldn't really sort of call off to something. You've got 60 microseconds to get your work done, and so there's a sort of like a bit of a window, and the Z80 doesn't run at a super speed on that. So
Tim, a question. Is this thing with some tweaks, would it be amenable to capturing PAL as well?
It's just line counts, essentially. There's more lines in PAL, and so
I don't believe in PAL. I don't believe in PAL, Tim.
Well, but this is just black and white, so you're not worrying about the color.
No, it's the color burst would be a trouble. But the black and white, it's just a bit of timing, and the counting of lines. It waits for so many lines to the start of the page, and and then does its sort of 190 odd lines for the Spectrum part of the video. Bits chopped off either side. There's 200 and sort of something lines. But yeah,
and Adam, to your question, you don't actually need to build in saving to the program, because you can use the save screen to do it.
Okay.
Which is part of the genius of the method of dumping it right to the screen. Because
then you can load that up into a paint program or something like that to edit it if you want.
Right. And so then you could have loaded it into a variety of the paint programs that came out in the 80s, loaded screen files, because that was the common means of exchanging images on the 2068 and the Spectrum.
That makes sense. And I'm noticing we're just about at the 2-hour mark. I mean, I don't mind going over, but the recording usually stops at like 2 hours, right? Just so, and people.
No, David's time runs out at 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
You can record for a lot longer.
Okay. So do we have any last minute business that we want to wrap up? Thank you, Tim, for that update, by the way.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Do we have any last minute business? Like maybe when the next meeting's going to be? Are there going to be any interruptions in timing or anything like that?
Okay, so that's a good question. Let me go to the page I have for the next meeting is, let's see, August 1st is a Monday, but that's in a week. So the next meeting is actually going to be August 8th. And then 2 weeks from that will be the Sunday meeting on August 21st. And then we run into Labor Day in September. And I don't know how you guys feel about Labor Day. Tim Swenson, do you guys, West Coast folks, what do you do for Labor Day?
I don't know what others do, but I don't do a whole lot. It's just another day off from work. So
okay. I mean, I'm not averse to having a meeting on Labor Day. That's fine by me.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, same here. I don't plan on going anywhere.
Okay.
And Tim Horner isn't affected by this at all. So
right.
He's like, what the hell's Labor Day?
Well, wait a minute. Well, they have a May Day. You don't have a Labor Day, do you, Tim?
Yeah, we do in October.
In October. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just simply
Also,
denying
Evie,
that
I think I'm close to you, by the way. I'm in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm on the West Coast. I'm Bay.
Whereabouts in the Bay Area are you?
Hercules.
Hercules. I'm in Union City, south of you.
Cool. Very cool.
Any other last minute business there, David?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Anyone else have any last minute visits we can tie up in a minute or two?
Well, he's cracking the whip, man.
I know, isn't he? He's awesome.
Well, David, he said you got to keep people on schedule, so I try.
Adam's our committee chairperson or meeting chairperson. Sorry. Well, cool. Well, thank you, Evie, for joining us, and thank you, Yaro, for joining us, and thank you, Stano, for joining us. One of the things that we haven't done in a while is a Zoom without a guest or without an agenda. And you guys want to do that again soon? You talk about projects, talk about whatever.
You just like an open forum the whole 2 hours?
Open forum for 2 hours, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll talk the whole time, no problem.
Fill that dead air.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually.
Probably the next time I should have, I think Evie's, Carter's going to show up on Tuesday. So I'll have that by next time. So
good.
Maybe I can show that, on a Spectrum, and I don't have the 2068 thing. I don't think you've made one yet officially, right, Evie? So I know that's coming. So I'll probably pick one of those up when they become available. But
I'll probably try to get the software hooked up in a week or so.
Cool.
Yeah, no big rush on that, but I mean, hey, at least that was kind of what we were talking about, right? I wanted something for I wanted it to work on the 2068 as well. And it's not that far of a stretch from the Spectrum.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Wow.
Well, thank you everyone for showing up. This is a good meeting. It's really turned into something good, David. I mean, not that it wasn't good before, but you know, it's a regular meeting that we get to talk and chat, and it's a good time. It's a good time.
Yeah.
See if you can get some of those software engineers that wrote this code for the Timex. They might still not be around, but
yeah. So
might
actually,
still
you
be.
know, I'm working on that. I'm working on trying to reach Scott McCourt, who Will Lon and Dave Boyle reported to. Unfortunately, Dave Boyle is the person who wrote the bank switching stuff, and he passed away a number of years ago. And then so we've you know, we lost that. And there are other Timex folks that I'm trying to get a hold of. There's a woman who was somehow involved in working with the third-party folks in terms of licensing software. And when Timex shut down, she started a company with her dad and her husband. And I have her name and address. There's another woman who did marketing for Timex, but only on the 1000, and she left before they started working on the 2068. But she has a really, you know, cool and interesting story to tell. There's a guy named Rex Naden who was a VP. He came from TI to he was one of a couple folks that came from TI to work at Timex sort of midstream. So he came in to work on the 2068, help move it forward. He was sort of you know, like he was a VP, so he's a little higher level and focused, you know.
What about Danny Ross? Is he
in
still
Georgia somewhere? And yeah, you guys want to talk to him? I will track him down.
I don't know. Some people have some thoughts about him. I don't really mind either way, but you know, when you get that high level in a company, yeah, there's a lot of fluff.
Well, so it's interesting you should
Maybe
mention.
he doesn't want to join us, so he's going to be like.
Well, that could be, you know.
It's interesting you should mention Dan, because the woman who did the marketing stuff who on the 1000, when we talked, she talked about some sort of you know, marketing missteps that Timex made in terms of bringing out the 1000 that could have been you know, if it had gone the way that she thought it should have gone, it would have led to an interesting different market differentiation for the Timex computers. Instead of being direct to you know, drugstores, for instance, some of the major chain stores like JCPenney and Neiman Marcus, and there was something else, Macy's or something like that, they were all interested, but they wanted to be exclusive. You know, they didn't want to compete against drugstores. So I got a laundry list.
Good.
Sounds great.
All right, cool.
I don't know what Ryan's
on my
showing
list.
there. Some kind of is that on an emulator or something?
What's that?
Ryan's showing some kind of, I don't know.
Oh, what do you got up, Ryan?
Spinning.
Oh, that looks like View 3D.
Yeah, true.
Ryan, you can't just let that be there and not say anything, okay?
Yeah, come on, Ryan.
Come on.
Well, I had that listing of 3D by what was his name? Jack Keane, but it doesn't say in my listing like where I got this from. I'm sure it came out of a magazine.
So that's a type-in listing, like a basic, not basic. It's got to be machine language, I'm guessing. Definitely.
Well, there's the machine language, and I'm trying to figure it out because you got to put in some coordinates of a profile that gets rotated.
Yeah.
But the coordinates are limited, and I'm sure the article talked about what the ranges of the pixels you could use. So I don't, unless I can find the article, I got to reverse engineer it. It appears it generates the like 4 pictures, puts them in memory somewhere, and then the machine code just rapidly copies those into the display, I think. I believe that's what it's doing.
Yeah, that was a trick that you could do. You could switch, bring those screens in real quickly. Ryan, I'm gonna you're running that on a Pi, it looks like an emulator on a Pi
Yeah, it's on
the 400.
400.
Okay, nice.
It's
Okay,
it's in Fuse.
yeah, Fuse. Okay, all right. Well, you know what? Let's talk about that in the future. Let's talk about emulation, especially with the 400. That's a nice little machine.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Cool. All right. Thank you everybody for coming. This is again, it's been a fantastic fantastic meeting. And I will see you again in 2 weeks.
Bye folks.
All right, guys.
It's been fun.
Later, bye.
Thanks. You have a good one.
Thank you everyone.